Hello and welcome to the next episode of Coffee and Comebacks, and welcome Sarah Furness. Sarah is an author, a speaker, an executive coach, and has spent 20 years previously flying as an RAF helicopter pilot, and I'm sure we'll go into some of those interesting stories around that. I'm really interested though, Sarah, to hear about what's coming up, which is the launch of your new book, Fly Higher, which I know we're going to go into and speak more about, but also around your business interests and everything that you've got planned. And I know hopefully you'll share that with our listeners. So if I can hand over to you for you to expand on what I've just said and give us more of an insight into you and who you are.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me along on the show. It's great to chat to you. Yes, where do I start? I suppose the obvious thing is that I've flew helicopters in the RAF for 20 years, and it's because of that I'm doing what I am doing now. In the latter part of my career, I just became very interested in how the mind works and how we can help people to really just achieve their best, fulfill their potential. And I was sort of learning things about what was going on in my own head. So that then led to me getting qualified as a coach, and then also getting onto the speaker kind of industry, because I discovered that people quite like hearing helicopter stories, and it's quite a good way of getting the message out there, whilst also hopefully entertaining people. And then the last bit of the puzzle, I suppose, was writing the book, which really is everything that I think people need to know to become kind of higher flyers than already, because they're probably already high flyers, because let's face it, you're all fantastic. But how can we fly higher than ever before? So that's a potted history. I'm sure we can go into more depth, anything that you want to know.
Yeah, and one thing we did miss, and obviously we said before we came on air, is the most important role of all, is that you're a mother. And you juggle everything that you do with parenting, as many of us listening do. So it'd be interesting to delve into that as well, and share sort of how you found that through the years. But could we go back then to your time as a RAF helicopter pilot? Could you give us a brief insight into what those key milestones look like for you, and some of the challenges that you had along the way and how you overcame them?
Yeah. I mean, gosh, how do you summarize 20 years? Probably badly, but I think the thing that I found was a challenge, which I also really benefited actually from learning to get through, was I just wanted to be liked. I wanted to be accepted. The military's got this brilliant kind of sense of camaraderie. It's all about teamwork. And it's great to sort of belong. And there were times I didn't always feel like that. And that's not to sort of throw stones at the RAF, that was in my head, a lot of it. But that was something that I was aware kind of interfered a little bit with, my potential and how happy I felt at times, and perhaps wanting to conform. So it's something that I definitely am keen to help other people with, is understanding that we all want to belong and we all want to be part of a tribe, and that can be incredibly enriching, but also having the courage and the self-confidence to stand up for what we think is the right thing to do, and to show our own kind of unique awesomeness, I suppose.
Yeah, and you speak a lot about giving permission, as in giving yourself permission and awareness. Would you say at the time, and you speak about awareness there, did you have the awareness at the time, or do you feel like giving yourself that permission is something that's grown with your awareness?
It definitely came later on in life. I think I was very occupied with wanting to be liked and doing what I thought I needed to do to be liked. And I didn't have the awareness until really quite recently, I suppose. And again, that's what's caused the change in career, was that I needed to give myself permission to be Sarah and not try and be someone that I wasn't. and also give other people permission to be who they were, and if they don't like me because I'm a bit mouthy, then that's also fine. You can't be everything to everyone. So permission's been a really, really kind of key word for me. And it's definitely something that I've got to grips with much later on in life. And it's something that I hope I can help other people get to maybe a little bit earlier and save themselves some of the pain that perhaps I went through.
Yeah, that would be brilliant to go back into that as well. But whilst we're on that side of your story, and you said about finding it difficult to obviously summarize 20 years, what about your greatest achievement? If you were to bring it down to one or a number of your sort of greatest achievements, how would you share those with us? I know I'd caveat that with there'll be some operational elements that you wouldn't be able to share. But in terms of what you can share, what would you say is your...
And it's such a good question. I think probably what I'm proudest of is towards the end of my career, when I was in a leadership role, I was a flight commander and I was leading on operational detachments in Afghanistan. And again, I was really grappling with my own kind of, oh, will they like me, and still wanting to be kind of popular, which you can't always be when you're a leader. And there were times that I definitely did stand up for what I thought was the right thing to do, and I think that was the right thing to do. And also I was very guided, I think, by becoming a parent. I think up until that point I'd probably seen leadership very much as kind of like, this way, boys. And I'm saying boys on purpose because it was mostly men, but it was very much about being out front and being the loudest and drinking the most beer and being the strongest. And I think something slightly evolved in me when I became a parent, and I realized actually it's about letting people spread their own wings, quite literally. And so I became a bit more of a nurturing leader, and I was finding my feet very much with this. But I remember my chain of command kind of saying, you're too motherly in the way that you go about this. And actually, when I look back on that now, I'm proud of that, because I think it was maybe a side of leadership that wasn't quite so prevalent in the Air Force, and it would have been easy to conform with what I thought was the right thing to do. But I was guided by what felt right to me. And I think that is something that I'm really keen to help other people do now, and find their own strengths and where they can really help people grow and nurture.
Yeah, that authentic side of leadership can be really difficult, can't it, in certain environments? And I think actually, if you're not aware of where your natural environment, natural leadership style sits, then it can be really difficult to also bring out that authenticity. And I can relate to that, actually. I think that as a mother, you look at life really differently. You have a self-awareness that's different. You also have a bit of a self-preservation that's potentially different as well. Did that come into your, obviously with your type of career, did that start to play into your mindset as well, and the way that you led not only others, but also the choices that you were making yourself?
For sure. I think, it's not a game anymore. And that's not to say that people who aren't parents are less important, or that their lives are more expendable, but it certainly made me grow up a little bit and realize, it's actually not that clever to get blown up if your child is then an orphan, And also, I think it probably helped me to get some perspective, because I always knew I was going to deploy as a mother. I didn't have a problem with that. But when I was deployed at the same time as Arthur's father, who's also in the military, that was quite a turning point for me, because I realized they're going to just keep doing this. They're always, they don't care that Arthur's got, no parents at home, but I cared. That really kind of crossed the line for me. And it helped me to realize that no one is ever going to tuck my kid into bed at night if I'm not the one, making those bold decisions. So it helped me to realize that perhaps my priorities had changed, and I was ready to look at other options outside of the military.
Which is a nice segue into the transitional element, in terms of how you made the decision, and then the journey you've been on since leaving the RAF. So did you spend time before you made the decision to hand in your notice and move into the civilian environment to really sit back and think about what was important to you, as you said, or is that something you have done since you left?
I think a bit of both. I think the word in my mind is kind of evolution. I definitely had that moment of reckoning when I was in Afghanistan and Arthur was at home with, you know, no parents. I thought, actually, I'm not sure this is necessarily what I want to do forever. And that led me into a teaching role where I was teaching at Defence Academy of the UK and was teaching air safety. And I realized, you know, we're obviously very concerned with air safety in the aviation world, because if people crash, they die, and it also is expensive because we mangle helicopters. So we want to learn about how not to have accidents. And what I discovered was it's really all about what's going on up here. There's an awful lot of resilience and, emotional intelligence and all those kind of skills that we might not have associated with flying. And it became really obvious to me that these are things that we needed. These are tools that we needed to have. So it grew in confidence, I suppose, that this was where I wanted to now focus my energy. And then when I decided to take that leap, magically COVID kind of happened. Not that we would wish that on ourselves. And it gave me really quite a great opportunity to go online and start doing webinars and online coaching, initially just for military people for free. But it allowed me to kind of grow in confidence and to start growing a client base. So in some ways, I was very lucky to have that transition period during the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, I would agree, because it's the reach, isn't it? That if you're able to adapt, and let's face it, most of us had to adapt in some way during the pandemic in the way that we engaged, even if it was socially. I don't know how many online quiz nights that you did or, socials. I remember our work Christmas social was online for one of the years. So you just had to adapt, didn't you? But actually, for some people that go, okay, this is a brilliant opportunity to increase my reach and engagement. For others, that can be quite difficult. Did you find that when you were creating those new relationships, as you say, that the virtual environment actually gave you a different reach into their lives, or was it very similar to face-to-face?
No, I think it was completely different. It was completely new. We were, as I would say, I was quite resistant to the idea. But it just simply made things possible. And I was amazed that people kept sort of turning up to these. I used to run Wellness Wednesday sessions for the MOD, and I was amazed people kept turning up. And also I started to see familiar faces. So they were obviously coming back for more. So no, I think it was quite humbling in a way that, what you think about how to teach people or how to, help develop people is probably, you probably haven't got it all figured out yet, and there are new opportunities that were presented.
Yeah, and again, that sounds like a really interesting hook to come on to. But just on the wellness side of things, you mentioned about the male-dominated environment, and when you took more of a nurturing approach to leadership, it was questioned, if you like, maybe in certain spaces. Did you find that actually more men engaged with the wellness side of things as you move through the pandemic, or is it still quite heavily dominated by women? Because research has shown that women do tend to reach out and talk more often. Unfortunately, male suicide rates are far higher than that of women. And I'm just interested in, if you think about the sort of people that tend to listen to this podcast, often ex-military, ex-elite sports, and any male or female, but often they're in that space, and it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on what that balance is like now.
I think there's a lot of people doing a lot of good work to make it acceptable, wrong choice of word perhaps, but to make men feel like it's acceptable to talk about it. For sure, I saw in the military, people just not talking about this stuff, and then unfortunately getting to kind of a breaking point. When I used to run the air safety courses, nothing to do with well-being, on day one, it's 40 blokes with their arms crossed. And after we've gone for, the obvious drinks on a Monday night, and then we've opened up a bit, by day two, you've almost on every course, someone would go, I've actually got stage 3 burnout, or I've had depression, or, my teenage daughter is, going through psychological issues. And so what I discovered was that there was an awful lot underneath the surface. And I do think that a lot of work is going on to make that conversation more acceptable. And again, I think it comes down to permission. I think that if you tell blokes we've got to talk about mental well-being. Understandably, a lot of them might go, nothing wrong with mine, thanks very much. And that's actually kind of how I got onto the speaking circuit, because rightly or wrongly, maybe men won't turn up to talk about mindfulness, but they will turn up to talk about helicopter crashes. Still talking about the same thing, just calling it something different. And if that means I can help people that might have denied themselves of help, then that's what I'm going to do. So I realized in a way that I had a kind of a gift in a way that meant that maybe I could connect with some people that might not have been able to access that kind of help. And I wanted to use it.
Yeah, that's a really good point, isn't it? Is how do you bring people into a room, literally or metaphorically, just to have that conversation? I had a similar conversation with a guy. I can't say too much because it's a podcast recording, it'll be coming out soon, but he's a mental health advocate, and he talks about removing the stigma, and says that actually, if people won't, share their lived experiences readily, particularly when it comes to men, then it's going to be really difficult to overcome the stigma in organizations, no matter how many initiatives, how many great events you go to. Actually, it's about saying it's okay to have the conversation. So I think this links really, really well into that. But on that note, why do you feel that organizations engage with you then when they, obviously, as you say, you've got a really unique hook, and particularly let's face it, as a female in that space, because there are far more men in that space in terms of, not just flying helicopters, but in the military. What is it about what you bring into the conversation that is, is the hook, if you like, for organisation? I mean, I've seen some amazing testimonials, one of them being the best in the business. I think that, it says it all. But we'd love to hear from you in terms of, what is it that brings you into their organisation?
Yeah. Well, I think I'm acutely aware that right now they are looking for female leaders, that they're looking for that kind of thing. So diversity and inclusion is doing me a great favor right now. I think a couple of things I needed to realize was, as you very astutely said, women often do talk about their problems. So in some ways I was thinking, oh wow, we're still going on about this mental health. Are we overdoing it? Are we creating a problem that isn't there by talking about something that actually, maybe we're creating an attachment to loneliness by talking about it too much? But I might say that because I'm a woman and I would talk about it. What I was a little bit slow to pick up on was that a lot of men won't, and we are different. And I think it's okay to say that. So I think the reason that organizations got me in is because I wonder if men feel safer talking about these things because I am a woman. So that whatever reason creates that kind of psychological safety. But also when I'm telling my story, I'm being very candid about, what I was going through and my own limiting beliefs and the things I had to get through. But really it's giving them a voice to their own thoughts and feelings that they might not have done, and they don't need to. They don't need to stand up there and go, yeah, I was scared or I was afraid of rejection, because I'm doing it. And I'm saying, look, I'm just going to admit this. And if you recognize any part of yourself in that, then let me reassure you, you're not the only one. And there is a way out.
Yeah. And sometimes that's all people need to hear, isn't it? It's not just me. We can be our own worst self-critics, can't we? And think that what we're thinking or feeling is not the right thing, or we wouldn't want to share it. And I'm interested actually, because I'm looking at your keynote subjects, and you talk about three particular areas actually, and without giving away obviously too much of your of your content, would you be able to, I mean, I love the whole point around becoming a ninja, thinking about creating that Jedi mindset, because it doesn't matter what sort of situation you're in, you need to have the habits, which again, your habits formula, it'd be great to talk about. So could we just go into that a little bit more to give a flavor? So maybe start with the habits formula, and then if we could go through the train hard, fight easy, etc., that would be brilliant.
Yeah. So I mean, habits, we all know what a habit is, but we also love a mnemonic in the Air Force, don't we, or in the military. So it stands for healthy automatic behaviors in threatening scenarios. And really what I'm doing is helping people to create those healthy automatic behaviors. And I won't go through the HABITS because we don't have time, and I can share all that with you afterwards. But the main takeaway for me is it's training. You know, we train our minds to be more resilient under pressure, or we train our minds to focus our attention somewhere where it's helping us as opposed to hindering us under pressure. So really, I'm kind of combining mindfulness, which is training your mind, with the military aspect, which was, you know, train hard, fight easy. And you know this, don't you? We didn't just rock up to some kind of conflict zone and hope for the best. We trained and trained and trained and trained and trained. Whereas for some reason, when it comes to mental health or performing under pressure, we expect ourselves to just get it and just be naturally good at it. It's a load of rubbish. We can train ourselves to do it. So it's so really it sort of takes those two ideas of what do we need to do? How does our brain need to behave under pressure? And how can I train myself to do that so that it's such an ingrained behavior? I don't have to think about it. It's automatic.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, that's part of what we do when we're in training, isn't it? It's so that when, you know, you come under contact or a situation happens, you literally go back to the drills, you go back to basics, and it's just, you know, everything's about the drill. We saw it with, you know, the recent Queen's funeral, where that was something that had been rehearsed for a long time, and obviously very short notice when it was all you know, pulled together. But actually it was immaculate, and that was all because they knew the drill. They had trained really hard, you know, and they were able to execute it in a way that it was just second nature. They didn't really need to think about it in the same way. So I don't know about you, but I've spent the last sort of 15 years in the corporate environment. And one of the things that I think would be a great lesson to bring over to that space, I think some probably do it well, and I think some try. And actually, I do think there may be some organisations that don't actually recognise the power of putting their teams through some challenging situations, through some tests where they see where the gaps are. And, you know, what's your thoughts on that? And what sort of lessons or tips might you share with any listeners today where they can actually start to, you know, exercise that organisational resilience, I guess is the term.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. You know, and I'm acutely aware as well that in the military, we sort of have that luxury of being able to train because we don't spend all of our time on the front line. Whereas in a corporate world, you are effectively on the front line all the time. They're easy to say. So I think our job is to sort of make that manageable in the corporate space. And I think what I would take away from it is very simple actions that you can do repeatedly, that you can fall back on under pressure will help. So for me, what I would be teaching people is where you focus your attention is something you can control. And you don't realize that until it's kind of, it's not obvious until it's obvious. A lot of the time we're distracted, whether it's by other people or self-sabotaging thoughts or devices. And it took me a while to realize I can choose to bring my attention back to something that I choose. And I can use that to focus on positive thoughts, or I can use that to focus on a drill, which is going to help me perform better. But the starting point is focusing your attention where you want it to be. Now, that's something everybody can do. You don't have to have the kind of the military training budget. That's something we can all do when we wake up in the morning. So I think it's about making that training something you can genuinely do in a busy lifestyle, but has the same philosophy as sort of train hard, fight easy, keep doing it, keep repeating it. So the next time you go into a boardroom meeting and you're thinking of having a meltdown, you actually know how to steer your brain in a more helpful direction.
Yeah, no, I think that's a brilliant tip and such a good point, because it can be really hard to embed or take learning on if it's not something that you are going to be doing all of the time. But I do agree with your point that you can't be training all of the time. So it's that balance. You also talk about the secret to bomb-proof resilience, and resilience is I think it's a really live conversation just in general right now, isn't it? And you know, away from organizational resilience, that whole how you build personal resilience. What sort of tips do you generally share when you're in a speaking situation or coaching situation? And maybe what are your top 2 or 3 that you would recommend when we think about how we approach challenging situations or events?
So one word, it comes down to one word: choice. Again, for a long time, I didn't realize I had a choice over what I was thinking, what I was feeling. I felt like I was hostage to the inner critic or whatever it was. And I realized you can choose how much attention you give to these thoughts. That's not to say you kind of live in denial and only think happy thoughts, but you can choose whether or not to spend your time worrying, or you can choose to focus on something else. And equally, controlling the controllable. You know, we spend so much time worrying about the future, which I get why we all do it, but it's pretty pointless and, you know, doesn't really help us out. So it's controlling the controllable, making little choices every day that we have the power to make for ourselves. I think no matter how small those choices are, when you keep making those choices, you feel like you're in control and you feel powerful. And I think we might have forgotten how to do that because COVID came in, no one knew what to do. We just followed orders for 2 years and we forgot to make choices. So I think what I want to do is remind people that, you know, there is a time and a place for following orders. We get that, we were in the military, but there's a time and a place to exercise your own choices. And I think when you start doing that and the light bulb kind of comes on, again, you can't sort of unsee it then. And you think, oh, actually, I'm more powerful than I thought.
Yeah, that's great. And it's the compounding effect, isn't it, of the number of more positive choices that you make. And then when you make those choices, you think, actually, that felt good. I can do that again. And it just creates that hopefully virtuous circle. When it comes down to individual leadership, and again, I know we don't have time to really go into the element around fear and how that can drive a lot of behaviours around leadership. But what I thought would be a good question to ask, which might draw out some of the interesting points for our listeners, is actually, what are the challenges that leaders tend to come to you with? So what are the common themes that you might discuss, whether that's in an informal setting or in a structured executive sort of leadership scenario? Obviously, again, without giving anything away in terms of confidentiality, but would you say there are some themes that crop up time and time again that you would share with us?
Yeah, definitely. I think it depends how much you want to drill down, because it might manifest as, well, I'm not as effective as communicating as I want to be, or I'm not sure if this is for me anymore. When you drill right down, I think it comes down to self-belief. And I used to think that was just me kind of projecting my own narrative, because I definitely know that I, you know, went through a whole period of like, oh no, I'm terrible. And I realized, gosh, there's a lot of people out there who are incredibly competent and look like they've got it all, who underneath it all just are terrified that they're getting it, you know, badly wrong. We call that imposter syndrome these days, don't we? You know, we've got like a trendy label for it. And what I really want to be able to do with my book and with my speeches is show people that just because you're thinking it doesn't mean it's true, you know. And I've heard that before, goes, well, if I wouldn't be thinking it if there wasn't substance. No, you're thinking it because you're a human being and we are programmed to self-doubt. It's what keeps us alive. So forgive yourself for thinking that. And actually, there's no need to wrestle with it, because that's just being human. But the important thing is we get to decide whether or not we're hostage to that belief. So long-winded answer, the short answer is, I think everybody struggles with a bit of self-belief. And what I want to help people do is navigate it as opposed to fight it.
Yeah, that's a great way to describe it. And I completely agree with your whole point around the thought process and the way that we create a narrative in our mind. In that, for some of us, or, you know, I'm sure for some people listening, we can get stuck in the negative thoughts, and around 80 or 90,000 thoughts a day is the average human. I've read the fact somewhere, can't quote me on that exactly where, but I'm sure I read it somewhere. And about 60% of those tend to just be negative by their nature. Not that but just you might be thinking, oh, it's really cold, or that's really annoying, or whatever it is. But their thoughts, they're not always a reality. And I think reminding ourselves that it's okay to have those thoughts, but actually we can create often the reality, positive or negative. You know, I was speaking to somebody this morning, they're talking about speaking something into existence. You know, if you genuinely believe that you are able to do something, you want to do something, you're going to do it, then speak it into existence. Say that, hi, I'm Sarah, I'm, you know, this or that. And actually, if you don't say that, then why or how would others believe that you're this confident, effective leader, or whatever it is that you're looking to come across as? So I just think that's number one key message, isn't it? And I think you really get that across in everything that I've read and listened to with you, which leads me on to your book. I was actually lucky enough to be somebody that was shared one of the chapters of your book after an event last week. So thank you for sharing that. But what led you to write the book? You sort of hinted about it at the start of the conversation, but you know, I've met a lot of people that will say, there's a book in me. I say that all the time and I still haven't written it, but I will. I commit to it here. I will write a book. I'm just not sure when. But it's that piece, isn't it? That you did it. You have sat down, you have done the hardest thing, which is actually putting pen to paper, making it happen, and it's about to launch. So could you talk us through your reason why, but also your journey through writing your book?
There's two reasons. One is the business angle. I'm a speaker, I'm a coach. A lot of speakers and coaches have books, so it lends a bit of credibility. And also it provides another option for support. So if you don't want to go into a coaching program, time or money, you can buy the book for $13.99. So I hope I can reach a lot more people and, you know, a lot more future Sarahs. So, you know, maybe the top level CEOs do have the budget to work one-on-one, but you know, I would have liked to have read this book 20 years ago. And you know, so hopefully I'm making it possible for more people to access the techniques that I've learned. So that's kind of the business side, and it does then segue into the, you know, the passion behind it. There was a long period in my life when I imagined I was the only person in pain, the only person who was finding it difficult. And actually, it was quite humbling to go into the air safety world and the coaching world and realize, God, you know what, everyone's just as scared as I am. And I actually found that to be a very humanizing experience and a very bonding experience, because I realized this is the human race, you know, this is what we're all like. And I feel this sort of compassion and warmth. I know that sounds a bit woo, but I really do. I want every human to feel as good as they deserve to feel. And I remember what it felt like to be scared and lonely. And I know that there are lots of other people out there who are scared and lonely. And I want to show them some hope and show them a way out, because I think humans are incredible what they can do. So, you know, that's the kind of the more noble ambition, is to give people the self-belief I think they deserve to have.
Yeah. And did you have the fear when you were writing your book and when you got to the point of sharing it? Can you share with us how that felt?
No, I'm quite a sort of, if I say I'll do something, I tend to just get on and do it. My lots of people sort of procrastinate. I have the other problem. I'm quite impetuous. So if I decide to do something, I just get on and do it, and then think I could have probably thought that one through a bit more. So probably not. When the book was then out and I sort of reread it, I went, oh my goodness, why did you write that, Sarah? But I did have a book coach. So to sort of answer your previous question, that was brilliant, because, you know, I would say to Anne-Marie, you can have chapter due by this date. And I would do it, you know, we're born people pleasers. So if you say to someone you're going to do something, it's a good way of keeping your promises. So I would advocate anyone who is thinking about writing a book, turn that into positive action, hire a book coach. I've got one I can recommend, and they will just help you actually put pen to paper.
Yes, that accountability, isn't it? Like you say, when you commit to something and you've got to, well, it's worth saying to somebody you haven't done something that you said you would do. So it's that whole, I didn't actually know book coaches existed. So I've learned that, and others listening. So that's something you'd recommend, getting on board with a book coach, and then they help you shape where your thinking's going and create accountability.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think gone are the days where you get a publishing deal with Penguin. I mean, you know, I'm still open for business for book 2 if Penguin are listening, but you know, it's not like you've got your editor. A lot of us self-publish these days. That's what I did. So the book coach is kind of that person that to, you know, provide that accountability and that, but also probably a bit more coaching, as opposed to just have chapter 1 done by this day. They help you see what the book's going to look like, work out who you're writing it for, and all that kind of stuff.
That visualization. Do you use techniques such as visualization in your coaching or when you're speaking, or is that not something that comes into your...
That's a really interesting question. I've answered the question in that I probably use stories more than visualization. And I'll tell you why. I think it's because I'm quite kinesthetically biased. I can tell you how I felt. I can't necessarily tell you what it looked like as well. So I know that my strength and my leaning is thinking about what I remember in my head and how I was feeling. I'm very tuned into my emotions. So I feel like I kind of want to help people with that side of things because I'm very comfortable in that area. I'm not as good with the visualization side of things.
Yeah, but that's a really good point though, isn't it? That we all see and work in a different way. You know, as you say, there are different auditory, visual, you know, in terms of our dominant sort of way that we tend to learn and grow. But also when it comes to working with individuals, it's trying to identify, well, how are we going to get the best out of each other? Are they somebody that likes to, are they a real doer? Are they somebody that needs real push if they're going to do things? So I think that's part of the skill of the coach, isn't it? Is working out within, and also knowing your strengths and weaknesses and where you feel comfortable.
Yeah, definitely.
What are you most excited about other than the book launch, which it'd be great if you can just tell us a bit more detail about that and what's to come. We've got some key dates. I know next week's, actually this week is a big date. But yeah, what are you most excited about in terms of the future and the next months and years with the work that you're doing?
I think I am very excited about I suppose going kind of global, which sounds a bit egomaniac, whatever that word is. But you were talking about speaking things into existence. And I had this kind of utopian dream during COVID when I was homeschooling that we were going to do a gap year when my son was 8, which is next year. Probably not going to happen because he's on his 3rd school and his father's gone. Can we stop moving him around, please? But the idea was born that I was like, right, 2023 is global international year. I'm going to do a world book tour. I'm going to go around the world. I'm going to go to Australia, Singapore, and I'm going to make this happen. And again, because I tend to just sort of be so stubborn that I want to see things through, it's starting to take shape, and I've been signed up for an Australian speaker bureau. Hopefully I'm going to get some organizations in the Middle East and Singapore. So I think I'm excited just to kind of see what's possible, and if you just dare to say, I want to try that, and prepared to look a bit stupid when it doesn't happen, actually a lot of the time it does, and so I guess I'm excited by how limitless and uncertain the future is and the opportunities that brings me.
That is amazing. I'm excited for you and obviously be following that journey, but I think that's a really good message for us, isn't it, where I think there's a few things in there. One, about not being afraid to fail, trying things, acknowledging that sometimes it will go really well, other times it won't. And actually, rather than be embarrassed about it, be proud that you tried it and you're willing to put yourself out there, give it a go, but know when it's time to move on to the next thing. I think the other thing is about just broadening horizons and sort of doing things to make it happen, isn't it? It's taking that action. And it's a bit like when people might say, oh, well, I really, I wish I could do that, or I wish I could, it might be run a marathon, or, just using a really rudimentary example. Well, then book your place on a marathon. Absolutely. And put your trainers on. It's those things of just do it. So I love what you say there about the global book tour, going global. Can you give us a bit more information on Fly Higher and how the whole launch is going to happen? Because there are certain dates as well that we want to be aware of.
Thank you for asking. So yes, Fly Higher. A little bit about the title. Essentially, I believe that we're all high flyers, as it were. And a lot of the people that will pick this book up will already be high flyers. So the first thing, it's a mark of respect, really, to my reader, that you don't need me to tell you how to sort of ace it. You're already acing it. But maybe that's not the challenge. Maybe the challenge is I don't always feel like I deserve to be where I am, and how do I get to the next step? So that's why it's called Fly Higher. And so the book launch is happening in Henley on the 3rd of October. And that's another really good story about speaking things into existence, because the Henley Literary Festival. It's huge, you know, the most amazing authors go there. I'm a complete unknown, but I live in Henley. So I just emailed these lovely people and went, do you need a Henley author? I know you don't know me, but I live in Henley. Did I mention that I live in Henley? And then I was in kind of Henley Life and Henley Standard. And I said, you know, at the bottom, I say, Sarah Furness is writing her first book, which will be published in time for Henley Literary Festival, brackets one can hope. And eventually they relented and gave me a slot. So I don't know if that's kind of verging on bullying or if that's manifestation. You could decide.
Bit of both.
But I know exactly, it works. So I've got slots at Henley Literary Festival, 10 a.m. on the 3rd of October in the town hall, and that's going to be the book launch for the physical book. And then the big date is 5th and 6th of October is when it goes on Amazon, and that's when you can pick up a Kindle copy for 99p just on those 2 days. After that, it goes back up to normal price. But also, as an extra thank you to anyone who buys my book, the Kindle book, on those 2 days, I will offer a discounted signed copy of my book. It's really important that I try and get some Kindle sales. I'll be really honest, it's because that's the bestseller campaign. So the more Kindle books I sell on that day, the higher up the rankings it goes. So you're doing me a favor by buying a 99p book, and I will reward you by giving you a discounted signed copy, if that sounds...
Sounds amazing. I'll note in the diary. So in a couple of days, we'll be logging on. Although I don't have Kindle, so that's going to be a slight, unless you can do it through other platforms. But I'm hoping to be there on Monday.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Yeah, and obviously, you know, don't buy the Kindle if it's not going to work for you. But you can download, like I've got an iPad, and you can read it on the iPad using various apps. So you don't have to have a Kindle. But don't worry, I'll still do you a good deal.
Sounds like a plan. Looking forward to it. Sarah, I'd like to just end on a high in terms of conversations. I feel like we've been, actually it's going to be a real pun here, flying high the whole conversation. So been waiting to get that in. But on a serious note, I feel like we could actually have a lot of conversation and have gone into so much more detail around what you do. But I do think by reading your book as well, and we'll include some links as well so that people can have a look at your website, they'll be able to find out more about you and what you do, and hopefully get in touch. But going back to the sort of high point, what would you say has been the most valuable lesson that you've learned in making your transition out of the military and into a new career space? Your golden nugget for my golden nugget listening.
Learning to be my own empathetic witness. Lots of psychobabble in there for you, but essentially, you know, I spent a lot of time worrying about what other people thought, wanting other people to say that it was okay, or to make me feel better when I was having a hard time. And it was learning that actually I needed to listen to my own emotions and sometimes just grieve and just go, yeah, that was a bit of rubbish. So I learned eventually to stop looking out all the time, almost for approval. And I don't know, again, if that's a military thing, because we're so kind of in with everyone else, but it was learning to look inwards and go, you know what, Sarah, you've got this. You know, you don't need everyone to tell you that you're wonderful all the time. You know, just be the best person you can be. So it's a bit of a trite example, but it took me a long time to learn that. And I feel much more secure now that I do. And it is what I want to help other people learn, is that, you know, they've got it in them. Everything they need is right here, and you don't need anyone else. It's not to say we don't want to feel supported and have great relationships, but everything you need is right here.
Yeah, and it comes back to your point about self-belief, doesn't it? And you're just showing that that's something you've built, and obviously something you have to maintain. It's one of those muscles, if you like, that once you've got to that space of having that self-belief, it's about maintaining it and creating that support network around you. And it sounds as though that's something that's been happening in spades over not just the last few years, but obviously the network that you had within the military as well. So best of luck with the book launch and the going global next year. Hopefully we'll have you back on even when you're a best-selling author, if you're willing to do that.
Definitely.
But in the meantime, it's been fab to speak with you, Sarah, and we hope to speak again soon.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to seeing you next week, and thank you for having me on the show.
Thanks, Sarah.